All right, joining us now with more on this is political analyst and former Queen's Park correspondent Keith Leslie. Keith, what do you think the impact of this is going to be on the Ford government?
Well, this is a real bombshell report. I mean, let's face it, the initial suspicion was that the government, perhaps Premier Ford or his housing minister, had tipped off the developers about which of these Greenbelt lands they were planning to open for development. Turns out it's worse. The developers told the government what lands they wanted to either buy or develop. And then the government, they told the chief of staff to the housing minister what specific lands they wanted. And darn if they didn't get those lands. And the value of those lands, as Al reported, is going to go up by something like $8.3 billion now that they've been, certified for removal. There's something about this that just smells. It still smells afterwards. And the government's, insistence that it had to rush to get this done just falls hollow because of so many reports saying they really didn't need the Greenbelt lands to meet their housing targets.
And a lot has been made today of the fact that Ford and Clark say that they didn't know anything about this. The report putting it on a political appointee. Do you think it's credible? You were at Queen's Park for a long time. Do you think it's credible that the Premier and the housing minister didn't know about this?
Well, I mean, certainly the opposition parties aren't believing that it's in any way credible. I find it myself shocking that a chief of staff would have been able to take such actions on his own on such an important file. Remember, this is something that the Premier was caught basically promising developers he'd do it, and then he promised voters he wouldn't do it. And then after the second election, he did open up the Greenbelt. So he's already lost his credibility on this. And to get these lands approved, this chief of staff changed the criteria. Every time the civil service staff said, well, that doesn't meet the environmental or agricultural or financial criteria, well, he changed the criteria so that these specific lands would fit it. Again, something really just smells here, and they had no needs to open up these Greenbelt lands other than to benefit PC supporters, some specific developers.
And Ford and Clark, they answered questions for a long time today. They certainly, I think, were out there trying to do damage control. Do you think what they're saying, that they'll implement 14 of 15 proposals, except kind of the most important one, is this going to work for them?
Well, they had to admit the process was flawed because, as the Auditor General pointed out, it was so bad it wasn't even a process. It was a political exercise in getting these Greenbelt lands specifically opened up. Number 15, of course, is the most important one, the one that the Auditor General said, come on, this process was so flawed, you need to stop and reconsider opening these specific lands. All the municipalities, Hamilton, Durham, Halton, they all said, we don't need to do this. We've got developable lands within our existing plans. Don't need to do this. The government is still pushing ahead, and the Premier and the housing minister, I thought, both looked pretty tense today, and they looked way defensive. I mean, the Premier's ultimate response was the ends justify the means. That's not a great political answer.
We're just about out of time, but I'm curious, do you think that Steve Clark will eventually become the sacrificial lamb for this government over this issue?
He probably should, but at the very least, you would think his chief of staff would have to resign, but they're standing by both of them right now, and I find that kind of surprising at the end of the day.
All right, Keith Leslie, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.